right, everybody, welcome back to Sports Media School, episode 19. I am your host, Nolan Bianchi, a Detroit sports writer working here in the Motor City. I got a very special guest with me today. They're all special guests, but we have a guy who is taking the microphone by storm, one of the hottest names in Detroit sports radio, maybe the hottest name in Detroit sports radio today. Jim Costa, welcome to the show. How's it going?
Good. Do you have like a power rankings? Are you keeping track of this stuff?
Yes, I do. And you're number one. I don't want to reveal who numbers 2 through, undetermined is. Yeah, I don't want you to know how long my list is either.
Okay. I like it mysterious.
Yeah, you gotta keep the people guessing. Yeah, in the radio biz, we call that a teaser. Maybe I'll reveal it at the end of the show.
Maybe I'll be learning from you because that's beautifully well done.
Excellent. Well, Jim, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. Now, you are somebody who, like I said, I also don't think that was an exaggeration. You are kind of taking the airwaves by storm a little bit. You're my new favorite 97.1 host. I didn't even say 97.1 The Ticket. That's not the only sports radio station, so I forget that. Is it now? Is it the only sports radio station?
Yeah, it's the only, yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
So I felt like it was kind of a given, but I probably should have said it anyways. It was bad interviewing technique on my part, but I'm very excited to get to know you, get to know the work side of you, get to know some of your habits, because you are somebody that a lot of people do seem to like. And I say that's a good thing. Tell me a little bit, I guess, just about your involvement with the station as it goes right now. I know you're kind of a fill-in guy, Thursday through Sunday. But how did you get there and, stuff like that?
Yeah. We can start with just what I'm doing right now, and then I'll go all the way back.
Cool.
Because despite being, I guess, the young guy on the station, I've been doing this for 10, 11 years, talk radio. So right now I'm filling in on shows when people are on vacation. So December is going to be a really busy month. So that's one of the things I do in addition to hosting pre-game, halftime, post-game for Pistons games, some Red Wings games, involved with Lions every Sunday, and then, talk shows in the evening. So typically right now it's a lot of Thursday nights, Friday nights, Saturday during the center of college football Saturdays, which has been a lot of fun. And then Sundays are Lions. And if the Lions aren't playing, crank out 4 hours on those Sundays too. But just if you want to go all the way back. So I'm originally from Livonia, Metro Detroit area, grew up listening to 97.1. And I would say that's one of the first kind of inclinations. I was like, hey, I want to do this. This could be a lot of fun. I've always been kind of a sports junkie, opinionated, stubborn. So I think some of those things lend themselves to doing this. And I went to Central Michigan to do it. And I got really hands-on right away. I didn't get my own show, I think, until a full year up there, but I got involved with sports updates, men's and women's basketball, hosting, softball and baseball hosting, going on the road, traveling with those teams. And then I was able to parlay that into doing some football stuff. So that was on the network all across the state, hour-long pregame, halftime, sideline, and tried to get as well-rounded as I could. I did an internship in Detroit with Carson Anderson. It would have been, I think, my sophomore year of college. I did another internship in Ann Arbor with one of the sports stations there. And my final summer up at CMU, I just stayed in Mount Pleasant and I did 5 days a week, my own sports radio show, and tried to crank out as many reps as I could. I filled in on some statewide shows and I did some Loons baseball. I've tried to do as many things as I could to get as many reps as I could and hone in what I wanted to do most. And all that led me to being set up in a really great spot to graduate into an afternoon drive show in Grand Rapids, where I was 5 years prior to joining the Ticket here, coming up on a year ago.
That's fantastic. That is quite the journey. And I want to ask you about Central Michigan. It's like, what is it with what's in the water up in Mount Pleasant? Because I feel like a lot of times, especially, local journalists, like I would honestly kind of think that like a majority of the journalists that I can just think of off the top of my head, they go to Central Michigan. Maybe it's just biased because I've interviewed a couple Central Michigan people lately, but it seems to me like there's some sort of winning culture over there in their sports media department, because it is, across journalism, it's across radio and across a couple different industries. And it seems like that all kind of works in tandem, because as the network grows, then more opportunities open up for other Central Michigan alumni and things like that. And I'm just curious, like, do you feel lucky having gone to Central Michigan specifically as it pertains to opening doors or just having opportunity on campus to kind of hone your craft and prepare yourself for post college?
You're talking about the Syracuse of the Midwest, Central
Yeah,
Michigan?
yeah,
No,
exactly. That's the one.
we have a pretty good track record as a university with a lot of people who do TV news and journalism. And yeah, we've got some people kicking ass in radio too, which is nice to see. I don't know that it's anything special. I hope they don't like revoke my degree. What I think it is there's just so many opportunities. You go up there and it's very hands-on. And I can speak for myself. I was awful when I first got to CMU. I had no business appearing on a radio station when I got to college at 18 years old, but they threw me on anyway and let me work through it and make mistakes and critique myself and get better. And I think I needed 4 years to get better and better and better and prepare myself to hit the ground running, driving an afternoon show at 22 years old. But you don't get that unless you get opportunity. And I can't speak to what other colleges are offering, but I know Central Michigan really helped me get ready for what I'm doing right now.
Well, and it's not that they just like gave you the chance to get better. It's that you also, like, when you're that age and you're like so emotionally fragile and like you're like, I want to be somebody, and then like you also need the chance to know that you can get better, because I think that that's something that a lot of people don't have. Like, there's a lot of people in this world who can write a story, or they can talk about sports or whatever it may be, but when it comes to actually making a career out of it, taking it seriously, I would agree that having all of those opportunities not only gives you a chance to get better, but it also it's a little bit like maybe less stakes than if you're reporting on Michigan and you're getting opportunities at a local paper or something like that. But at the same time, it's not quite as small as Open University, where I went, where it was like you can cover the basketball team, soccer team, and that's pretty much it.
I think you're onto something there, because I have described it as the perfect happy medium. Mm-hmm. Because at a place like Michigan or Michigan State, they have student programs, but you're in the shadow of not one or two professional outlets, but several. And you just kind of get lost in the wash. And it's cool to cover those games. But at CMU, you got to be one of the couple outlets at all these games. And you got to be at those press conferences as not just a shy student in the background. It was, hey, you're here to do the job. And I think that goes a long way in getting people ready.
Yeah, I think back to one of the earlier episodes we did. We had Evan Petzel, the fellow CMU grad of yours. He's now the beat writer for the Detroit Tigers. When we had him on the show,
he's great.
He was a spry 19-year-old college student, and I was like, dude, please. You're 19 years old. You broke the story about John Bonamego leaving or getting fired from Central Michigan. Talk to me here. How can students be on that plane? But again, I think, we kind of had this discussion in that episode, and this was years ago now, but it is that opportunity he would show up to the media availability, and he's the only one there. It's not that he's the one who got the scoop. It's that he's the only one who cares enough to get the scoop.
So it's two things. You get the opportunity, and then you also have to bust your ass, because I'll say that about Evan. It was very obvious early on that he was going to be doing some good things.
Boy wonder, I believe, is the word that I might have used in his introduction. He's pretty good.
Yeah.
Now you go to Central Michigan, you start bouncing around. When you leave Central Michigan, something that I find interesting is, like, I look back at me when I left college and I was like, all right, I'm going to go get me a beat job. Like, it's just so you're naive to, I guess, maybe what's ahead. And especially because I didn't have the connections that maybe a Michigan or Michigan State student would. Fortunately, I was able to start freelancing at the news, and now I just freelance full time. But when you get out of college, do you feel as if you're prepared to take on whatever's next? And then what was that learning process like as you kind of bounced around and found your way through Grand Rapids into Detroit?
Yeah. So I guess I'll back up a step further. It would have been my first semester at CMU. I had a bit of like a panic attack would be extreme, but you start realizing, hey, some of these seniors aren't just graduating and getting plucked in to great spots. And I briefly double majored. I was going to do a business major and give myself a fallback plan. And I got 2 years into that. I did like the core business classes.
Same. I failed half of them though.
And I got near the end, and it would have dragged out my college experience another year plus with just some of the requirements. And I had, a good mentor tell me, he's like, you're good enough. You don't, I mean, if you want to do the business school, I'm not going to tell you not to, but I think you're good enough. If you want to cash in and graduate and see what you can do, go for it. And it's fortunate I did, because timing was as big of anything for why I got the first job I got out of college. I had set up kind of a networking shadow. Can I come out and see how things are done in Grand Rapids through Phil Tower? He's a CMU alum. He was running the news station at the time. And he's like, yeah, sure, kid, you can come out and see the station. And I had known Phil because he had come back to alumni things. He was really active. So I planned to show up. And then maybe about a week or two before I was going to walk into the studio to see it, Sean Belizean, who was the afternoon host at the time, had announced he was leaving to go to Detroit. And I showed up with a demo tape, a poorly fitting suit, and was like, hey, and they said, why don't we have you fill in a couple days? And I don't know if they were like daring me, but I said, yeah, sure. You let me know. And I would drive from Mount Pleasant to Grand Rapids, a 90-minute drive, 3-4 times a week to do fill-in shows with different combinations of hosts. And I'm still finishing up classes and trying to position myself for this job. And if I had stayed in school for another year for business, I mean, I still would have chased it, but I think it would have been a lot harder. The timing was just so perfect because it was right around the time I was going to walk for graduation. 2 days before I was going to walk, they handed me a contract, and it was beautiful. Just a great opportunity to step right in.
And that's one of those, when we talk about luck and, in the sports world, I think there's like that cliche. It's like luck exists when preparation meets opportunity. And it's like, and that's exactly though what that was. And being able to be confident, like, I think there's a degree to it too, where you have to be confident enough to accept that position, to be like, yes, I am ready. And then to go out there and actually fulfill what you kind of said you were going to do. And I think what's interesting about the whole the business school thing is actually like I don't know if I've told the story on the podcast before. If I have, I'm sorry, shut up. One of the biggest moments of my life, the pivotal moment of my life, was when I watched a commencement speech by Charlie Day from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, big hero of mine. And he was talking about how when he graduated college, he could either, move to Hollywood and give her a go, or he had this great banking job and maybe he could get himself a nice cushion and then go and all that other stuff. But he basically realized that there was a good chance that he would fail at both jobs, and he would rather fail in the place that he would be proud to fail in. And then the next day, I gave my mom a heart attack when I went down to the OU admissions office, and I was like, I'm going to be a creative writer now. That's my new degree.
When I went in to effectively cancel my double major, you got to picture it. This is like a business counselor, and they were like, I'm sorry, no, you've done too much of the work. I can't tell you, like, what do you mean you're not going to finish a business degree? A business degree is such a great thing. And not that against business degrees, it would have been a nice, feather in the cap, but I took the leap of faith.
Yep. And a lot of times it's not having a fallback plan that like forces you to dig down when you don't know if you're going to get that next job, or you don't know if you're going to be good enough. And that's what I think kind of forces you to keep growing and keep learning and keep getting better.
I'm obsessive. So I think that helped me too.
So talk to me that. I mean, like how do you study and learn the business? What do you look for some examples of like you putting together the pieces in that sense?
Yeah. So I said earlier, reps are super important. And I think everybody you have on will talk about reps, whether it's writing reps or radio reps or video editing or on camera reps. All that stuff super important because you get more confident, you get more comfortable. But what I'll tell people too is, what are you comparing your work to? Because you have to have a standard. When you go back and listen to yourself or read yourself or whatever, are you comparing yourself to people you respect? You're not trying to knock off anybody, but there are people who do the job well, and there are people who don't. And I would always try to compare myself to people who I thought were doing a really nice job. And when I listened back to my tape, it was judging it on the standard of, could this be major market radio? Could this be, network radio? Could this be, and you listen, you got this 19, 20-year-old voice, clearly not, but it's about the steps, the preparation, listening for how people do this well and saying, I like that, or I don't like that, and helping that form who you are and what your style is.
And I mean, like, I think that there's a really easy way to do that in writing. Like I would even say it's a little more copy and paste in writing, but it applies to really any media or really any art form or any way to do anything. And that's like when I'll read a story, by somebody that I respect, and I'll be like, ooh, I really like the way they set up this location right here. Like I felt something from the way that they described this building. And then when I go into my next 1, 2, 3 stories, if I have an opportunity to try something like that, and it's not a plagiaristic type thing, but it's just like, okay, why did that invoke emotion in me? How can I apply that to my next story? And that's something that I think is so important to do, because you just stop doing it to some degree as you kind of continue on. And it's something that you have to make a habit of and make it a point to do, is kind of analyze work and say, ooh, I like that. How can I need to remember that, or something like that.
Yeah, I think it was one of those things with talk radio. I think some of it's art and I think some of it's science. So with the art part of it, you got to have passion. You have to genuinely feel what you're saying and articulate it and entertain. But there's also a scientific part about it. Formatics. Why are we doing this topic? How long are we doing this topic? Are we taking phone calls? How are we setting this topic up? When I got to Grand Rapids, my co-host, super spontaneous, Big Drew, what's a rundown? What's, and I would ask him for any topics we're going to do. What's the hook? Why do I care? So what? And trying to hone in on what's the real conversation we want to have with people. How do we want to set this up to have the richest conversation, the most engaging and entertaining conversation possible? And so there is like a pre-show process that I think is so important too. And I'll give him credit, by the way, because I was wound way too tight as a 22-year-old with thinking I had all these ideas, and he broke me down and made fun of me and taught me how to laugh at myself, which I think was really important too in Grand Rapids. But that's that balance, that science and art that goes into what I think, at least for talk radio, is essential.
That's 100% true, like across a lot of different industries too. And I mean, like, I remember when I like first started taking my screenwriting classes, that was like a big thing. It was like you were going to have structure and plot devices, and at the end, it's going to be like a Swiss watch. It's not going to be this like painting that you just kind of make up as you go. It's all these little pieces that work together and work for each other, work with each other.
But I think the best work to the audience feels like, oh, it's just spontaneous, right? Like you listen, like I think to use a national show, because they used to be our lead in Grand Rapids, the Dan Le Batard show. Total, like they spoof sports radio. They make fun of sports radio.
Yeah.
And it feels so casual, but it was ESPN radio. They didn't just show up and flip microphones on. So I think if you prepare, like I get most of my on-air confidence from prep. And I might not use everything I prep. But just having it in the back of my head and knowing I know what I'm talking about leads to confidence in executing. And I think then you're not scripting anything. So when you're on the air, you're just leaning on what is in your head. So I think that's why the best people make it feel and sound so easy.
So I think I understand this. I'm pretty sure I understand this, but you're saying like the difference between saying, I want to make this point, and the difference between you simply knowing what the third down statistics are, or, those types of things.
Yeah. I mean, like you could script out your whole opening monologue and read it to the audience. That sucks. That's not good radio.
Yeah.
So it's bullet points. It's things you want to get to, but then just being able to speak on it extemporaneously. I think that's the key, and that you don't get that without prep. So that's kind of what I'm trying to say.
Well, and it also allows you to be authentic, because and you run into this issue when you don't know what you're talking about, where you don't remember what you've said before. You don't remember, why
that's
you
the worst
previous ways.
Well, and I think that's why you got to be, I think that there's this argument about, are we too hot takey of a society, right? You get the debate shows on TV. And I just made a decision very early when I was doing this where I'm going to say what I think. And that way I don't have to get caught up in what did I say 2 weeks ago? Because what I said 2 weeks ago is it's consistent with who I am. And that doesn't mean you don't change your opinion over the course of a season, right? Or a couple of years, or how about this Jim Harbaugh thing, right? I mean, what you thought about him 5 years ago, 2 years ago, this year, it changes when you're presented with new information. But as long as you're honest and authentic, you don't have to worry about, oh, well, what did I say before? And I'm keeping some character up. I've never believed in that. I don't think it works. I think people see through it. And I think you get yourself in your own head. And I just don't want any part of that.
Well, I mean, I think that there's a difference in, what you do and, what a hot take artist is, because what I think that you do very, very well. And I'll be honest, I've only heard you on the radio a couple of times. I don't listen to the radio a lot these days, but I do.
We'll talk about that later. I know you want to talk about the industry.
It has not. Yeah, we are going to talk about the industry. But but from what I see from you on Twitter, you don't say anything that's a hot take. You say things that people might disagree with, but whatever you say it with conviction. And I think that's the difference between a hot take and what, I believe you to be doing. And that's, speaking from the heart, but speaking very, very robustly, because, like you just said, you have the prep work, you did the prep work, you know what you're talking about. And so why not talk like that? And I think that's a lot of times the only way to grab people's attention too. Like, you need that conviction, or otherwise people are going to go, who cares? Like, if you're just like, I don't know if I guess, I don't know. We'll have to see if golf is going to be good. Like,
Well, I like to attack topics. So it's the way I do shows. And you said you've listened a few times, or people who've listened. We'll get into how your weekend was half hour into the show, and it'll come up just conversationally. I like to attack the start of shows and attack the topics with conviction and do it in a way that brings the passion and energy that I truly feel. And I think that's how you do compelling radio. So I guess if it comes across on Twitter too, then I just continues to support that. You just got to be genuine in how you deliver it.
Does it bother you the amount of disingenuous people in your industry?
Used to bother me more. It doesn't, I mean, at this stage, it doesn't really bother me all that much. I mean, people are going to do what they're going to do, and you can kind of control what you're going to do. I mean, that sounds like a total BS answer, but I truly don't concern. Like, if somebody else is doing something disingenuous, then let that be their own downfall.
Fair enough. Now, when it comes to, there was something I was going to ask you, and I should have written it down, but I completely forgot. It was just a note that I just had. Let's talk reps. Let's talk practice. Let's talk, maybe you don't have airtime. Like, how would you, I guess, prepare in ways that weren't necessarily those reps? And I know you kind of talked about like emulating, you listen to people you respect, compare yourself to people you respect, but was there a way that maybe off the microphone, like, oh, I have to watch something a little bit differently now? Like it.
So I had a class at Central, and I think it's might not be required, but most kids get funneled into it. It's like a cinema class. Mm-hmm. And the teacher said, if you go into this major and you take this class, you are going to watch movies differently the rest of your life. You are going to watch TV news differently the rest of your life. You are going to consume media differently the rest of your life. Because a lot of people get into it because they like it. Mm-hmm. But when you listen differently for what you like and don't like, you're a different consumer. Yeah. You're not just listening to go, do I agree that Goff's a bum? You're listening to how was it set up? And I think that's, another comparison would be when I was playing, like I played high school football, and when you're injured, they always talk about mental reps, right? If you're just going to stand on the sideline,
don't sit special.
Right. Well, he takes it to another level, but I had a coach, and it was like, hey, don't sit there and, mess around on the sideline, pay attention and go through the rep like you were playing. And if you listen to shows of people you respect, and you sample different shows and you listen for things, then I think those are the reps beyond just starting a podcast, which is something I did before I even got my own radio show. I did it in the
2012, like before it was cool, huh?
Yeah. Well, this would have been, I talk about not cool. How about this image for you? So I would go to the CMU library and check out a room Scott, I needed someone to do it. I had 3 roommates. Yeah. I'm not going to do a sports podcast. That's, by the way, wouldn't have been very good in a dorm room. So I'm like lugging this podcast equipment into a like little key and sign myself in and do a podcast for 4 people. But those are the things that I was willing to do to get the reps, in addition to all the mental stuff you were just talking about.
Well, and that's the stuff that separates, the good from the great, and the guys and gals who won't get there, and the guys and gals who will get there because they're willing to do things like that. And again, like I think that's something that we just don't give enough attention to across, something that I always makes me like literally laugh out loud is when I think back to like my college writing classes, and my professors will be like, you're going to write a story on the cafeteria, and when you graduate, you're going to show it to people and they're going to hire you. Like, what? That you're lying to me.
Right.
And it just kind of like makes me laugh. Like when I think back to, I guess, just how what I've realized from like doing this show and kind of just talking to other people is that like in our industry, there really is no good way to learn. Like I don't really think that I could honestly in any way say that a semester in the classroom really improved me in any marginal way.
So yeah, what I would say, going back to them
take school seriously, kids.
Yes. So back to them taking my diploma away from me. I learned way more outside of any class I took. And I'll give you an example. We had a capstone, right? Big fancy word, like at the end of your college experience. And you're in this class with all the other seniors. And I would look around and I'd see, a handful that had done News Central 34, been on camera or off camera and put in the work in the after school programs. And they knew what they were doing. And then you'd have half the class who just did the curriculum. And like not being a jerk, like you're not going to get a job in this industry. It's hard for all of us who've spent 4 years doing all the co-curriculars, as they say. So what I would say is CMU earlier, ton of opportunity, ton of reps. You have to do it, because if you don't and you just hope that the classroom experience is going to prepare you, I don't believe it, and I don't buy into that.
Yeah, I will backtrack on part of what I just said, though, because I do like the way that I kind of got my foot in the door was by making a good impression on my professor, who then helped me.
Oh yeah,
hey, here's who you got to talk to.
The professional connections are worth it, but just the learning the very basics in the classroom were not enough.
And it's very dumb as a whole. I'm very anti-college. I have 2 degrees, not to brag. Let's talk about the industry right now, because you are you have this, you're coming onto the scene, and I work in newspapers, and this is not a shot, but like it's kind of an industry that is dying a little bit. Like, do you think you'll still be in radio in 5 years? Do you think you'll still be in radio in 10 years? Do you think you'll just kind of evolve along with the position? Or I guess how are you preparing for that?
So I'll just start by saying, I want to be on radio, be on radio, because I do think there's an intimacy with it. There's an immediacy to it. I think big picture where the industry's going, it's you need to be where the audience is. So that's why there's such a focus on digital and being there when someone's scrolling their feed. Oh, there's a tweet, or there's a video, or there's an article. That's important. You want to be where people are. If that's on Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, you want to be where people are, podcasts. But radio isn't going anywhere. At least I don't believe it's going anywhere. There's an immediacy and an intimacy that you get with radio that you don't get anywhere else. It's long form. It's tapped into the people in that community, specifically hyper local for sports. I don't think it's going anywhere. I think behaviors change, and is it the same percentage of people that listen to radio that did 30 years ago? No. But I think radio is trying to stay with people too. And that's like for us, 97.1, we've got the Odyssey app. You can rewind, go back if you miss something. But it's, I don't know. I guess what I would say is I'm well aware that digital is the future, as everybody says, but I don't believe radio is vanishing or disappearing. And I think it's going to still be that bedrock for so many communities that it's where I want to be. I want to be on radio.
So you're like, you don't have any interest in maybe like doing a more digital show where it's still kind of radio, but like, let's say this was just referenced on last podcast, the Pat McAfee show, that's, I would, it's a show, but at the end of the day, like if I had to put it into a category, I would probably say it's most like radio.
Yeah, I would say it's a radio show done on YouTube.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, is that not how it's set up? So, I mean, then we just get into like mediums, right? But it is essentially the same product, right? So would I do something like that? Yeah, I suppose it would be stylistically very similar to what I'm doing.
Yeah. As it pertains to like the next 5-10, so like what is different now than when you first got into the industry?
Well, I referenced this thing earlier called an internship. Yeah. And I don't know that there are many of those around. I think that makes it really hard. I interned in Ann Arbor. I interned in Detroit at 97.1. I interned in Midland with the Great Lakes Loons. I did 3 college internships.
Yeah.
In addition to doing all the stuff with the student radio station. And college radio stations are still there, but the internships I don't feel like are there the same way they were, I don't know, 7-8 years ago. Mm-hmm. I think that's a challenge for people trying to get into the industry. I think let's use an example, TV versus radio. How many cities in Michigan have a local TV station? A ton, right? I mean, you go up at UP, Upper Michigan, Northern Michigan, West Michigan, middle of this. How many have that same presence live and local on radio? And it doesn't feel like there's quite as many. So if you want to break in a smaller market, it feels like maybe there are fewer of those opportunities than 10 years ago when I was first breaking in. So I think those are barriers that make it even harder for a young person who's really passionate about this. It doesn't mean they don't exist, that you can't find them, but it feels like there are fewer of those opportunities.
And it does feel, it's kind of interesting, right? Because it for a while, like it's almost like the radio and / podcasting industry is now kind of catching up to the newspaper / blog industry, to where, 10-15 years ago, there were all these like little blogs going up, and there still are, only now they're like getting bought up by hedge funds and then, all that good stuff. We won't get into that. But it was kind of, I guess now people are doing with podcasting what 10-15 years ago they were doing with blogs on the internet. Would you say that's kind of a fair assessment to where you can kind of just
a sense that
yeah.
Well, I mean, like you said before, when podcasting maybe wasn't as cool. Is it cool now? Or podcast cool now?
No. As a matter of fact, I never one time in my entire life has anybody ever said he has a podcast, and I've been like, yeah, like happy about it. Like I always like slink my shoulders and like, Yeah.
But in terms of like maybe lessening the barrier to entry, like to flip it around. So if you could, hey, it's harder to go get your start doing talk radio in a smaller market.
Yes.
Can you supplement that by finding another way? And yeah, that's kind of what I was getting at, is you have to find a way, and people still will. There's an appetite for people to listen to spoken word. There has always been that appetite before we had radios and before we had TVs. So that appetite is always going to be there. And that's what I was getting at. You got to be where the people are, and the medium kind of shifts and changes. But you can get those reps by maybe you start a YouTube channel or you start a podcast. And I think those are, I guess, tools that you wouldn't have had. Like if you're talking to someone who's 45 or 50, they didn't have the option. They couldn't go buy a microphone off the internet and plug it into their computer and record 45 minutes of them talking about the latest Lions failure and hit send and let everybody listen to it. That didn't exist back then. So that does maybe level the playing field, or at the very least make up for some of the other lost opportunities.
I would even perhaps argue, just to double down on your statement a little bit, that maybe the appetite for the spoken word is higher than it's ever been. Like I really do truly kind of feel that way because of the pandemic. And I started noticing, like, this is something I was actually having a conversation about with my friend the other day. Yes, it is exactly like that. And I don't listen to music nearly as much as I used to, because in a way it seems like I'm a very habitual person. So I'll get in on a show, and then whenever I have time to listen to something, I'll listen to that show. And I guess what ends up happening, and I think maybe subconsciously, and this is something I kind of just said the other day for the first time out loud, is like, I don't want to leave my friends. Like, I don't want to shut it off to put on music because I don't want to stop talking to my quote unquote friends that I hear listening to. And I've listened to them for so long that I feel like I'm part of that in a little bit of a way.
So this is great. And this is like buried deep in the middle of this podcast, but this is such a great point. And if you get into why I love what I do, I mentioned intimacy and community. It's what I loved about what we did in Grand Rapids, afternoons, being that place for people. There are some stations in the country that don't really take phone calls. I love talking to people, being there to have the conversation with people, creating that connection with people. That's what makes this fun. Otherwise, I'm just a sports bot giving takes. It's way better to be able to level with someone who calls in and wants to give you a hard time or agrees with you and wants to add to the conversation. I think that sense of community and attachment and camaraderie is what's always drawn me to spoken word, to radio, just because I think radio is the purest form of it.
Yeah, and it's almost like in a way we're reverse engineering it a little bit,
Yeah,
like
because now podcasts are trying to find ways to create some of that same intimacy.
I love doing this podcast, but wouldn't it be great if like it was live and then I don't know, like let's just
and I could read comments and
same time every day, right? And then
make it an appointment. Listen,
yes, and maybe we get some phones. If you remember those things, we get phones and people can call in. And
I think it was I'm going to get it mixed up. One of the big streaming services came out and they're like, we want to do it live. And I was like, oh, you're inventing radio.
Yeah.
Wow. Great idea.
Yeah. But it's kind of different though, in a little bit of a way, because like, and it's almost, I called into 97.1 a couple times when I was in college, a youngster. And it was like the most nerve-wracking thing that's ever happened to me. And I was calling in to agree. And so like, it's just weirder now because yes, like people can still communicate, but they communicate in a little bit of a different way because you have the live chat box and things are coming up like crazy. And I also, sometimes I wonder like how beneficial those live chats really are for, I guess, anybody in particular. Like it just feels like kind of a weird, it's almost too instant feedback. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. So I think that's where we have call screeners, or in the world that you're talking about, moderators. Moderators would go a long way because you want to filter through nonsense, trolls, people who aren't there to help the conversation at all. And I'm not saying like make fun of the host, but if you're just taking us off into some weird tangent we don't need to be in, then that's where we have someone screening the phone calls, or we can hang up on you. We've got a delay. If you're a moderator in one of these live comment situations, I think that serves sort of a similar purpose. So that's how I'd look at it.
Who have some of your big mentors been in this industry, and what have you kind of gotten from them? And I guess in terms of like lifelong lessons in a sense.
Yeah. I mean, gosh, I would say there's a bunch of people, little to big, really, because I think we're all kind of a product of people around us. I mean, your parents are people who help kind of inform some of your habits and kind of the person that you're going to be for a good chunk of your life. And I think the people you come across in the industry can do, they can help you in similar ways too. When I was in college, the voice of Central Michigan football was Don Shido, rest in peace. He took me under his wing and gave me a shot to work on the CMU football network, which was awesome exposure for me. He was someone that I could call and just kind of get open thoughts and feedback from. So I would say, Don Shido would have been one of those early ones. I would say, influences when you listen to people growing up, the show I listened to coming home from school was Valeni and Foster. So that was, kind of a taste into what I thought could be really compelling radio. And I know that was a really successful show for a long time. And now to get to work with Mike, I mean, he's been so good to me since I joined the station. I can't say enough nice things about him. I know that's controversial because not everybody likes him, but he's always been good to me. And I didn't have any relationship with him really until I got to the station here. But, other people along the way, I would say, I interned for Karsh and Anderson, and Doug Karsh is you talk about setting stuff up and teasing, and I think he does a really nice job with kind of setting a show up. You pick up different things from other people. Stoney will share and maybe overshare from his life. And I think we talk about letting people in and creating that sense of connection. Stoney's very good at that. So, those three at the station, I would say, jump out. I'm going to miss people. I think the first time I filled in and did the afternoon show with Rico, people compared my delivery to Colin Cowherd. It's not a surprise. I listened to quite a bit of Colin Cowherd when I was in college. And I don't know that I agree with him all that often, but I think he has a good way of delivering and setting stuff up. And so that's osmosis. I've never had a conversation with Colin Cowherd. So I think mentors can come in all kinds of shapes and sizes, whether it's very intimate with someone who you can call and get into the nerdy stuff, or just people that you admire from afar. I think they come in all kinds of ways.
Have you ever been in a situation where you're like, holy crap, you're right, I need to fix that? Like I sound too much like Colin Cowherd or something along those lines.
No, I don't get caught up in that too much, to be honest with you. Cause I think the first show that people made that comparison, I leaned into it and made fun of myself to end that first hour. Yeah. That's how I cope with it more than anything else, because the truth is he's one of the best doing this. And if that's the person you're being compared to, that's not really an insult. Or, I think Mike has one of the more aggressive deliveries on the station. And we just talked earlier how I can speak with a lot of conviction. Sometimes people will make that comparison. We don't hold some of the same opinions. So I don't get caught up in, oh, you sound too much like Mike. So you're saying I'm speaking with conviction? That's not something I'm going to get caught up in trying to change. So no, I don't worry about trying to sound like one person, because as we circle all the way back, anything I say is something I believe, and I don't have to worry about getting caught up in trying to be too much like somebody else.
I am kind of curious because I would like to think that, like, in sports media, like, everybody's nice to each other, and what's good for one of us is typically good for all of us and things like that. But as I've talked about in my last two episodes with both Ben Raven and Justin Rose, there can be a lot of jealousy that creeps up when, maybe you're not where you want to be. Maybe you're, trying to get somewhere. And we kind of just touched on how cutthroat the industry is, how limited the opportunities are. I guess, what was your experience like in that regard when it came to meeting new acquaintances and then, sharing your information with other people? Did you ever run into a situation where there were people who were kind of outwardly safeguarding what they had, or what's your experience like in that?
Yeah, I mean, just the bad part of the industry. I guess I was laid off, which I guess people say you haven't worked in radio till you've been let go, and I was let go in Grand Rapids, but there was really no bitterness there. I had felt like we put on a hell of a show. We had numbers to support it. The audience was super engaged. I felt like I could hold my head high when I got let go. The people in the building didn't want to make that decision. It was something that happened higher up the corporate ladder. So I never held any animosity, and I felt like I was ready for another opportunity. So when the chance to work in Detroit opened up, I ran through the door. I was thrilled to get the opportunity to work back here in Detroit, move here and have my life back here. And then even getting the foot in the door at the station, I can't tell you that anybody has treated me poorly or that I felt any sort of animosity. In fact, I mentioned I fill in on a bunch of shows. I've done shows with Stoney and Jansen in the morning. Both have been super accommodating. I've done shows with Gator in the midday, and he's super great to work with, and has said basically, hey, I love when you're in. I like that people have been overly friendly. If anything, there hasn't been any iciness. Mike and Rico have welcomed me into the show whenever I fill in for either one of those guys. I've done shows with Jeff Rieger, who, by the way, is one of the great guys in this industry. And anytime I do crosstalk, I mean, sometimes it gets a little, spicy if we disagree on something, but I never feel like there's any animosity with anybody that I work with, which is really nice.
Here's something that I have an issue with, like, in the world, is that, like, you can't attack somebody's takes without, like, why can't, if you're working with somebody and you're hosting a show with somebody and they say something that you find preposterous, you can and should say that's preposterous. But if you do it on Twitter, I don't know. It feels weird. And it feels like there's like this weird, I don't want to say culture, but like media people not wanting to call each other out. And I wish there was just more of it because I think it's like
Well,
fun
you know what
and
it
it's
is.
also good.
Well, you know what it is. It's when you text somebody and you don't know the tone. So
Yeah,
on Twitter, there's no tone.
that's
I'm
true.
sitting across from you. You can see my facial expression. You can hear the tone in my voice. You know, if it crosses a line and we take a break, we can hash it out right there.
Yeah.
It's open to interpretation on social media, and you think you're just disagreeing with somebody, and it strikes a nerve and it strikes a chord, and there's no way to diffuse the situation. I think it's like the whole thing when you get a text from somebody and you don't know where's
Yeah.
the emphasis in this text.
That's a good point. I just wish like something like that. I really, honestly, if I tweeted it, honestly, I'd probably do it like 5 times a day. But there's so many times where I'll see somebody that like is respected and I'll just be like, you can't
Your
tell
take
me you
sucks.
believe that. Like, don't insult, like, don't call me stupid like that. You can't tell me that you believe that. But I do think that there are people like, as we kind of continue on in this format of like, hey, you're live on Twitter talking to people. Like, I just wonder if like we're just gonna keep getting this more and more, where it's just people out there like just saying horrendously stupid stuff, and it bothers me because like it takes attention away from like good content that's out there. And I'm not even saying my like I don't really put all that much content out, or any content that competes with like this the disingenuous kind of parade that I feel like I just see from so many different people online.
So there's the saying in news, if it bleeds, it leads, right? And sometimes the negative, and sometimes negativity is deserved. I mean, our teams have been so bad for so long, but just the nastiness or maybe the easy button stuff is, I guess, more clicked on. I guess I don't know if
Yeah,
that's where you're trying to
it's
go
like
with
the
it.
engagement. Yeah, like you just want to do numbers, and that is weird to me
But I think that's
because
a short-term game. Like I do think it's a short-term game if that's the game you choose to play in this industry,
yeah,
because you'll get labeled for what you are, which is someone that's just trying to throw things at the wall to stick. And then one week you say one thing and the next week you say another, and nothing has changed in the story. You just needed a new section of a fan base to outrage. And that's not how you build a community. That's not how you get people to want to show up and listen to you every day and feel like they're part of it. What you do want is healthy disagreement. You want to know, hey, if I listen and I disagree, it's because that person means what they're saying, and reasonable people can disagree on things. You don't want it to be every time I listen in, it's just a different button they're trying to push with me. I don't think that works. I mean, it works for some people, right? But I don't think it's a long-term play. I don't think it's how you build a community.
That's fair. And I also love that you're putting so much attention on community. We kind of already touched on this, but like that is your entire success. And like if you had to put it in like one virtue that you can build, it's community, especially in today's day and age where like people can reach out to you, you're accessible. And I don't want to like give what I always tell people. So like I've recently consulted on like for a social media for a website. They were kind of just looking to spice things up, and I'm like, this is going to be me way oversimplifying things, but this is essentially what you want. You're going to take this engaging content or engagement content that I'm going to give you and help you out with, and that's the stuff like who's the most important person to the Lions win this week, and then it goes viral and people engage with that. I go, you need to engage with everybody who engages with you, because you're probably not going to get a lot of engagement. And then once you start engaging with them, they're more likely to come back to you again. And once their participation kind of keeps up, then other people who know them, who are in their circles, go, okay, like I'll interact with this guy too. And then because they see the participation kind of encourages them to also participate, because they know that they're going to either get a certain type of response, or their response is going to be welcomed. And I just think once you get to that point and it's like, okay, now we have consumers, how do we create a community? And it's a very step-by-step process that does take an amount of time. How long? It's that part's not scientific, but
no, what I would say to that, or to just kind of add to that, when I took over in Grand Rapids, they already had an afternoon show that took phone calls. And I thanked Sean. I said, you put air in the tires and gas the car up, and now we get to drive. Or now, when I fill in on shows in Detroit or, do my own shows in the evening, it's on a station that has that built-in audience that is also knows that their voice is going to be encouraged. And there's a saying, even I'll share within doing a show, calls beget more calls. Like if you have a truly engaging topic and one person calls in or two people call in and you take them and you go back and forth and you hear them out and you have your point, you'll get 5-10 times as many calls after that, just because, to your point, people feel welcome. And I think when you have a station that's been doing that for, on the FM, what has it been? North of 10 years, 12 years. That's why it's a powerhouse. It's why it's a great place to do shows.
Jim Costa, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. I got one more question for you. If there is a young man or woman out there who would like to be in the position of Jim Costa in 5-10 years, I guess, what is the biggest piece of advice that you are giving them for them to succeed?
Well, first, I would want to know how serious they are about it. Just being clear with people, because you might like sports, you might like talking sports with your buddies. It's a different animal if you want to chase it as a career, because it's not easy. I do think what we talked about earlier, there's some degree of luck and timing that you just have to get as well. And assuming the person is all of those things, they're serious, they're determined, they like sports, but also the job, the media aspect of it, I'd say reps. I'd say critique yourself. I'd say seek out mentors. I'd say get your hands on as many different opportunities as you can get and prepare yourself for the unexpected, because that's just kind of the way this industry is, and most of the media industries are. So I would say you've got to really want it. You've got to put a lot of time into it. You have to be willing to accept the harsh reality that the industry can bring, but also know that if you're serious about it, it can be a lot of fun. And I think that's what keeps people chasing that dream, is because 100%. They know how fulfilling and rewarding it can be.
Jim Costa, everybody. You can find him on the airwaves at 97.1 The Ticket, Thursday through Sunday nights. He's filling in pretty much every other day. Catch him somewhere. Go follow him on Twitter at Jim Costa, Jim Costa _. Anything else you'd like to plug or promote or anything like that? You got any cool, fun shows coming up? We're in a great time for football right now.
Yeah, this is really cool. With the fact that we have so much to talk about in the month of December. So I could give you individual shows, but what I'm looking forward to is the last 2 weeks of December. Morning show, both weeks. 1 week with Stoney, 1 week with Jansen. And I'm excited. We talk about consistency and having that community. Getting 2 straight weeks to do mornings is something that I am super excited for. So if you listen to this and you want to listen to me more, that's going to be the best consistent way to do so. Last 2 weeks of the year, mornings on 97.1.
There we go. And he is the best, most consistent guy in that place. So go check him out. Jim Costa, thank you very much.
Thanks.